Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new whiteboard video. Today we are going to talk about the stimulus to fatigue ratio, and this is something very important if you want to grow muscle. So check it out. Alright, so stimulus to fatigue. First of all, what is stimulus? Stimulus is basically the signal we give the body in order to adapt. Now this could be to anything, but let's talk about training. We train. We provide a stressor, a signal, a stimulus, whatever you want to call it, to the muscle in order for it to adapt. So the muscle basically needs to learn, oh, this was difficult for me. I need to be able to do this the next time. And that requires both neural and actual tissue adaptation. So that's stimulus. Now fatigue is a side product that comes with stimulus, that comes with the amount of stress that we need to place upon the body in order to adapt. Fatigue builds up and we need to be able to recover from that amount. If not, we do not move forward. If we do not recover from the amount of fatigue we create, then we will not adapt. It's as simple as that. So we need to make sure this ratio between stimulus and fatigue stays optimized and stays recoverable. So let's look at two very important aspects here, which is your personal recovery capacity. This one has a lot of influences, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, but just know that there is such a thing as recovery capacity, okay? Then for stimulus, we want to be moving in between your minimal effective amount of volume in order to create a stimulus and your maximal recoverable dose. If you go over your maximal recoverable dose, you will not recover and you will not adapt. If you go under your minimal effective dose, there won't be enough stimulus for you to adapt to. Simple, okay? So you want to stay between the two. And here's the trick. The closer you can stay to minimal effective, the more recovery capacity you will have free in order to recover from what you're doing and keep on moving forward. Let's take a training block, for example. Ideally, and I've said this before, ideally you want to start close to your minimal effective dose and throughout that training block work up to your maximal recoverable dose. Once you're there, you deload, you rinse, and you do it all again, but with higher loads, okay? So your recovery capacity grows as you grow and adapt. It's still a fact that if you go over it at any point in time in your career or whatever, you're not going to be growing anymore. So if you're at this point right now, you've been training for some years, or you're just starting and you notice you are not growing and you have the feeling like you're doing a lot in the gym, then you might be overdoing it, or you might be under recovering, which again, we're gonna come back to that later. Okay, so let's look into some factors that fill up this bucket right here. First one, exercise selection. So if we choose an exercise that is very neurally demanding, that involves multiple joints and multiple muscles and stabilization, then that one is going to fill up this bucket more than if we choose an exercise that doesn't. Very simple example for this would be a barbell back squat at heavy loads versus something like a pendulum squat or a hack squat. The difference here is that you will both train them with heavy loads, so neurally they'll both be demanding, but the hack squat or the pendulum squat requires less stability and therefore it's going to be less fatiguing to the body. That doesn't mean a back squat is bad at all. In the opposite, it's a very good exercise. But if you're going to program it, you know that it's going to create more fatigue. So if on the same day or the day after you're going to program something that taxes the same system, like for example an RDL, which is also going to load the hip, then you are creating a lot of fatigue in a short period of time where your body might not be able to recover from, and therefore your performance will be suboptimal too. So that's very important to understand. So exercise selection has a role in this. Then obviously it's going to come down to your total training volume and your training intensity. So if you're training like a wimp with under 60% loads of your 1 rep max, you're not going to be filling out this one as much. But for the same token, you will not be hitting your minimal effective dose with that, okay? So you need to creep up your intensity if you're training with light weights only. But to me, that's a very logical thing to understand, okay? Intensity. Your intensity, once it comes above that 60, close to that 80%, which is where we want to be, now then it's something that we are going to have to consider, because with that, if we have a total amount of volume that's very high, then your bucket is going to be filled up quite a lot, okay? And that's just from one day of training, for example. Now, if on top of that, life stress and your health status isn't optimal, which, you know, a lot of people have quite some stress in their life, and for a lot of people, their health status isn't optimal, that will also add into this bucket. So we're going to be filling it up even more. Then over here we have recovery variables, which a lot of people aren't optimizing. So I'm talking about sleep hygiene here, for example, hydration, food, nutrition, electrolytes. There's a lot of things that go into this, but if you aren't optimizing this, then basically what you're doing is not necessarily filling up this bucket, but you're making the bucket smaller. So there's less space for you to recover from. Now you can imagine that if life stress is going to fill up this space in the bucket, and your training volume is going to fill up this space in the bucket, this is still within your recovery capacity, as you can see. But now let's say you are going to increase your training volume. So either you're going to do more reps or more sets or more weight or a combination of the three. You will be adding on to this right now, which you should, because volume should be increasing, like I said, over a block from minimal to maximal. But now you already maxed out your recovery capacity, so where are you going to go from there? If you are going to add on anything, so let's say at this point you're now like, okay, let's add in some drop sets, let's add in some supersets, or let's add in some whatever intensification method you want to be adding in. Now the bucket is going to overflow and you're not going to be recovering anymore, and therefore you won't adapt and you only go backwards. So what's the important lesson here? You got to realize first that there is such a thing as a stimulus to fatigue ratio, and that if you go over your recovery capacity, you will not grow. As soon as you grasp this concept, you can then start to think about your training in a more strategic way, where you go like, okay, how can I basically start at minimal effective and then move my way up to maximal recoverable, and then do it all over again and stay within that range and don't go over it. That's going to be important. Then the second thing that's going to be important is maximizing your recovery variables, so you are maximizing this bucket and making sure it's as big as possible. And then the rest just fits within that. And you can, you know, if your recovery capacity is great, so you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you're hydrating yourself well, maybe you're in PEDs, for example, your recovery capacity is increased. Now you can increase your load, you can increase your workload that you place upon it. But again, coming back to one of my first points, the closer you can stay to this, to minimal effective, the more capacity you will have free, the more you will be growing, the more you will be improving. The closer you get to the top of that bucket, the more you'll start to notice it in your performance, in your energy levels, and everything that comes with that. So you won't be training as effective anymore. And this is also why I preach, and many other people too, preach a lower volume training approach and focusing more on the quality of that volume, because with that you can get that minimal effective dose in, or be somewhere in between the minimal effective and the maximal recoverable, and basically keep on progressing without ever going over your recovery capacity and basically shooting yourself in the foot. Okay, that's the lesson for today. Stimulus to fatigue, minimal effective, maximal recoverable. Find out what it is for you, stay within that, and then make sure you keep on making progression. Thanks for watching.